Hi, so welcome back to the second episode of Splitting Seconds, right? And today's topic would be
Every Tudor fanboy is actually also a Rolex fanboy.
all right. So just for the sake of your recap, right, we're gonna flash out the rules again real quickly. Pause if you need to take a closer look, and now we shall begin.
Sure.
Right? So Woody's gonna take the first round, and ready?
All right.
In 3, 2, 1.
Now, let me start by saying this. Every single successful commercial Tudor is a homage to a Rolex watch. You've got the Tudor Black Bay 58, which actually pays homage to a aluminium bezel Submariner. You've got the Tudor Black Bay GMT, the Pepsi, the famous Rolex GMT Master 2, right? Pays homage to that. You've got the recent Tudor Pro, which is really also a homage to a Tudor Explorer 2 in the early days of the first Explorer 2. Then you've got the Ranger, which is really a 39mm Explorer. Not done very well, granted, but still. All these watches, and then let's not forget the Panda. The Panda is one of the most successful chronographs, and it's also because you can't get a Rolex Daytona. So every single commercially successful Tudor actually pays homage to a Rolex watch. That's the first thing I'd say. Stop me if you've heard this. Every Tudor fanboy has a wish list. And that wish list is almost always based on something in Rolex. So they'll say things like this. I wish it has something like a glide lock or an easy link, right? Like the Tudor T-Class, right? I wish the Black Bay 58 would have it, right? That's a Rolex wish list. They want it to be just like Rolex. They want it thinner. So then it becomes closer to the Rolex again, right? What they really want, and that brings me to my third point. Money no object, security not being a concern. If you could pick between the Rolex or the Tudor, I can almost guarantee that if you had to buy it to keep it and you get to wear it safely, right, you would almost always pick the Rolex version of that watch versus the Tudor version. And I'll go as far as to say this. You would even pick one off the vintage Rolex catalog on that same condition, right, rather than pick up a Tudor. The Tudor really is the poor man's Rolex because you can't afford it, and so it's the thing that you can bash about and feel less worried about. And because you can't afford it, you don't play the dealer's games and all of that, right? You feel like, okay lah, I will settle for a Tudor. You're always settling, right? So I'm arguing that if money wasn't an object, almost all Tudor fanboys would have picked, if not a modern Rolex, they would pick the vintage Rolex instead, something from the past, right? And that's one thing that I'll go by. And my final point is this. A lot of people buy Tudor because of its association to Rolex. Imagine this. If you took the association out, right? No offense to Longines, right? If you now turn the word Tudor to Longines, what does it now become? Longines is homaging Rolex. This is not it. I don't think I want to buy this. That would be the immediate reaction that most Tudor people would get associated with. What they actually want is the association with Rolex. I'd argue that Tudor became really big, right, in the past few years because people started to realize, hang on, this is actually a Rolex company. So I'm getting Rolex quality for half the price, right? But actually, what they really want is the Rolex. So if I were to take away Tudor from every single Tudor watch, take away the brand name, and also then tell you, actually it's got no relation to Rolex at all, right? It will now be accused of being a homage to Rolex. No association, just pure homage, and it will be as commercially, value-wise, looked at the same way people look at Longines watches, for example. It won't be your first choice, it won't be your second choice. It will be, okay, if nothing interests me in this space, in the Rolex space, Tudor space, then only I'll go there, right? It's seen like a whole different camp. So I'm just going to say this. You cannot possibly argue that if you're a fan of Tudor, you are not secretly, maybe it's because of the stigma, a fan of Rolex. Take away all the negative stigma around Rolex today, and you'll be proud to say that I'm a fan of Tudor, I'm also a fan of Rolex. And I'm just going to rest my case right there.
All right. Cool. All right. So I guess this will be my turn right now. So
Yep.
in 3, 2, 1. Right. So mainly, I think the first big point I want to bring out in terms of why Tudor has, in terms of a distinct difference between Rolex, is because that you don't see, in terms of experimentation in Rolex, you don't see bronze, you don't see ceramic, you don't see titanium until recently in terms of the Deep Sea Challenge, right? So you have all of these different materials. You even have like the Metas movement, not only aesthetically in terms of movement wise as well. You have the Metas movement for the Black Bay ceramic right here, and that's something that you don't see in Rolex. So you do have all these different materials and different options that strays away from what Rolex are doing and gives other people in terms of options and varieties, different assortment that they can look for. And even a Rolex owner, someone that is that owns a sub, someone that owns a GMT and so on, would still add in another Tudor, not as a inferior product, but as something different that they could use and they want, right? So that is the first main point I want to bring up. And second, let's not look into the past, I mean, in terms of vintage Rolex, vintage Tudor, right? We look at modern Tudor specifically, where they have strayed away from being a homage to Rolex. They did not use the same name anymore. They did not have a ETA movement Submariner, and they have their own in-house movement right now, which is something that is they are building in a way. Tudor is rebuilding their brand to be something that can stand alone, right? So that's something that they have. And then you have like the modern Pelagos, for example, titanium, what's that, snowflake dial and everything. That is, to me at least, is very distinctly different from Rolex. Although you have ceramic bezel, but it's a matte ceramic versus a gloss ceramic, so that gives people an options to play with, right? And for example, my own personal case as well, why I would buy a Tudor, for example, a Tudor GMT. If when I own a Pepsi right now, I would still add in a Tudor GMT into the collections because it gives a different look, right? They don't give you the exact same color in terms of that the Pepsi look. You have a dark blue and a different shade of red as well that stands out, and some people do, like myself, like the look of it, right? And I would say right now, Tudor is in the space where you're able to get sort of like the best of both worlds. You have in terms of vintage vibes, vintage aesthetics of it in a modern build quality, right? And then lastly, I would say that Tudor has a very good value proposition, right? Some people might not, even if they can get a Rolex in retail, they might not even want to buy a Rolex, right? Because end of the day, a watch, it's not a necessity, right? It's something that you buy, you enjoy. Some people would only want to spend a fourth of the price of a Submariner for, let's say, a Black Bay. They say that is good enough for them, and they are genuinely contented and owning that piece of watch. And they, even if they can afford it, they do not want to spend it because they do not feel that the need to spend X amount for a watch that they can use a particular phone for the time and so on, right? So that gives them an options to venture into as well, right? So that is another good point. And I would say that Tudor, it's at a stage that is very much experimenting a lot, right? As mentioned as well, there's materials, movements and stuff as well, but more and more right now, yes, I would say that you have a bit of a homage looking to it, but you also have different things like, granted, it's something very much left field, the P01, that it is different, right? You can't argue that it's a homage or anything. So they are experimenting, and they will continue to experiment, and more new and exciting stuff will be releasing from Tudor. That's how I feel about it, right? So that is my point for round 2.
All right. Well, get ready for my rebuttal, but you can take a stab at what I said first.
Sure. All right. So in terms of, I think what you mentioned, right? In terms of, say, people that's looking to buy a Rolex are looking to because they can't afford it. That is something that I would say, I'm not going to deny that it exists. There are people that exist in particular that segment that will only buy Rolex because they couldn't, buy Tudor because they couldn't afford a Rolex or couldn't get, in terms of the connections, to get access to a Rolex. But I do also feel that a lot of people are indeed looking for Rolex. I think, as myself as well, I think the Pepsi is a good example. Some people, for example, they own a Rolex, but they would buy a Tudor as a quote-unquote beater, right? So that's something that's an option as well. There are several segments, right? You can have the people that buy Tudor as a beetle, that buy Tudor as that's something that doesn't offer in terms of the Rolex catalog. You have people that want something that is in a way unique, where that's something that Rolex do not offer, right? So I wouldn't say all of it, especially since the move towards modern Tudor. I think that has totally changed the game, and you do have more and more people that are genuinely into Tudor without the association of Rolex, right? So that is one. In terms of people wanting the feature of being thinner, wanting the glide lock and stuff like that, yes and no, right? Like, it all ties back down to the same point one, right? Where people who buy Tudor in the association of Rolex, yes, they are just looking for a cheap way to get something as close as possible with a lower price point. But then again, not every single one of them are of Tudor buyers are actually having that same mindset, all right? So I wouldn't lump it and associate that with the majority of Tudor. It's a subset of it. You as Rolex as a business, they are going to do it that way. You can't deny it's a business decision. They are going to try to capture every single pie available. So you have your Tudor lovers, you have your people that couldn't afford Rolex, you have someone that wants something different, you have someone that wants the different materials that Rolex has it. The pie, it's very big, right? A segment of them that wants to be associated with Rolex does not mean that every single one of them would want to be associated with Rolex, right? And I think that is all I have for my point.
Okay. Well, let's just go straight into round 4, shall we? I'm going to start off by saying this. James's first point is on experimentation, right? He quoted the Tudor P01. I think that was one of the most commercially unsuccessful Tudor watches because nobody really wanted to experiment. So for all the experimentation that Tudor does, right, it's really so small a niche because I argue that really most, if not all people, are looking to get into Tudor because they actually like the Rolex design language. That's why the Black Bay is so popular. And the P01 has no precedence in the Rolex lineup, right? And that's also why it doesn't really sell, because it's just too different from the Rolex mold. The design is just way too off. I'm going to take a personal swipe at James as well, because he made a comment just now that he would own a GMT Tudor even though he has a Rolex GMT Master. This is coming from a man that actually sold his Tudor GMT and actually now owns latest acquisition, the GMT Master. I wouldn't be surprised if he takes back that in real life as well, right? But it's all for entertainment, right? So I genuinely think even the mindset, but even if I say I agree with him, the fact that some people look at it that way, right? It's almost like buying the watch that you wish you could wear the Rolex out, but because you want something to beat up, right? And you don't feel so bad about it, you get the Tudor because it's close enough. But again, that link to Rolex, you don't break it. It's still very much linked, right? Now, I'm not going to go along the value proposition route because the value proposition also comes primarily from the angle that it's what Rolex used to be, right? if you rewind the clock before all this hype happened, right? Let's say 10 years ago, when Rolex was trading more at what Tudor used to trade at, that was what Rolex was. Rolex is no longer that, right? And so Rolex used to be the value proposition. It no longer is. And so Tudor has come in to fill the gap, which again draws the link back to the fact that it's a undeniable relation between Tudor and Rolex. So you cannot possibly like Tudor for all of its own qualities without ever taking away the connection to Rolex. I feel that the reality of the matter is the moment you break that link, Tudor becomes almost like a micro brand that's using some in-house movement, right? It almost becomes, no offense again, I use Longines just now, no offense to Longines, I'd say like Christopher Ward, right? Christopher Ward gets a lot of heat from the watch enthusiasts for a long time until the recent Bel Canto. But in-house movement, right? In-house modification, but no association to a big brand name. It becomes a brand like that. I argue that it's the only company in the world that's allowed to be a homage and no one cares. And so therefore, it's allowed to be a value proposition, right? It's nothing wrong being a Rolex fanboy. I think the problem of today's day and age is there's so much negative stigma about Rolex that people want to disassociate from them. But secretly, right, if you really like the Tudors, be it past, present, future, whatnot, there's a small part of you genuinely still likes Rolex. There's just no denying it. Be it the triangle, circle, circle, rectangle, circle, circle, whatever it may be, right? The Cyclops or the date. It's really the Rolex DNA that you're after. And for that, I rest my case.
Alright, so once again, you decide who wins. Looking forward for your vote.
And it's hinging on the fact that some of you genuinely don't like Rolex, by the way.
And yet again, I have to throw out this disclaimer that it's all for entertainment purposes. There are points that we agree, there are points that we don't agree, but then again, all of it is mainly for the purpose of entertainment.
Yeah.
So if you want to find Woody as a Tudor hater, I mean, we can't stop you, but yeah, that's how it is. So
yes, it's okay. That's your point of view.
All right, then. Thank you for watching this episode, and look forward for the next one.
All right. Don't forget to vote.
Bye.